Good afternoon, everyone. This is Shannon Gallo with Career Services at the CUNY School of Professional Studies. Thank you for joining us today. I always appreciate it when we can begin our webinars promptly. I will give it probably another 2 to 3 minutes just to allow some of the remaining people to log in. I think we're in for a really fantastic webinar this afternoon, the third of our 3-part series on interviewing. If you could just take a moment and type into the chat field and let us know if you can hear me clearly and if you can see the blue screen Learn Over Lunch webinar, part 3, all about interviews. Just let us know and we'll get started in another minute. Thank you, everyone. It's good to know that things seem to be working and technically ready to go for today's webinar. I'll go ahead and get started and go over a couple of housekeeping items here to begin the webinar. So once again, my name is Shannon Gallo. I am the Manager of Career Services here at the CUNY School of Professional Studies. Today on the webinar, I just wanted to thank Kelsey Richardson, our Career Advisor, and Anthony Sweeney, our Virtual Campus Coordinator, for their support in delivering today's webinar. These types of things would not be possible without a couple of our team members, so thank you both. In order to ask questions during today's webinar of myself and also of our 2 panelists, on your screen you see 2 boxes. The one on the left is what would appear if you're using a Mac, the one on the right if you are using a PC. So please feel free to send in your questions at any point during today's webinar. And the last section of the webinar will open things up and do some Q&A with our panelists. If you have any technical difficulties during today's webinar, please call 1-800-263-6317. Press 1 for GoToWebinar, then 2 for tech support. I also wanted to mention that if you are in need of captioning during today's presentation, you can access that via the stream text link that's on your screen. This was also sent out in the chat field. So please, if you are interested in getting live captioning during today's broadcast, please go to the link and you should be able to access that. If we should have any disturbances from outside the window here in Midtown, I'll just pause for a moment and then pick right back up where I leave off. So just bear with us if something like that should happen. Hopefully things should go off without a hitch though. So without any further ado, our agenda for today's webinar includes this introduction. I will go over very briefly late stage interviewing. So we're talking 2nd round, 3rd round, final interviews. I will talk a little bit about the importance of following up during these late stage interviewing processes. I'll talk a little bit about decision making when it comes to job offers. And finally, I'll give some very basic tips on the resignation process and how to go about that seamlessly and professionally. After those remarks, we will turn things over to our 2 panelists that have joined us today. And then finally, I will moderate some questions with those 2 panelists that are sent in by yourselves. So, talking a little bit about late stage interviews. for the most part, an interview that's at a late stage, a second round, a third round interview, anything like that, most of the time is going to be more focused on the organization assessing your personality, your professionalism, and just your overall fit within the organization. And I might add that these are the types of things that you as a candidate should also be assessing during these late stage interviews. I mentioned questions and answers because, you know, during a later stage interview, the questions and answers should be coming from both parties. After all, the job search is sort of a two-way street. So you want to be able to ask questions and get answers about certain things you may not be certain, as well as the employer being able to ask questions and getting some answers from you. I mentioned strengths and weaknesses more in the sense that you want to take these final round interviews as an opportunity to reinforce with the employer the strengths that you possess, things that you may have discussed in previous interviews that they seemed really impressed by. Make sure that you reinforce those. And conversely, with regard to weaknesses, take this opportunity to sort of dispel or minimize any of those that may have come up in prior meetings. Now, does this mean you should bring up those weaknesses? No. However, if the employer seems to address them, then you want to be prepared to discuss those weaknesses and, again, try and minimize those and maximize the strengths. These final interviews are obviously your opportunity to make some last first impressions. And I say this because at times, if an organization brings you in for a final interview and you've already been to the organization a few times prior, it may be sort of their last opportunity to gain some more first impressions. They may have you meet with someone you had not previously met with. It may be their way of having you get buy-in from senior leadership or another person in a department that is not necessarily a supervisor, but someone you would be working closely with. So this is really your opportunity to make more first impressions, even though you've been there before. As I mentioned, buy-in, this could also be an opportunity if a particular person in the organization has not felt as strongly about you as a candidate. It could be a last opportunity for the people who do think you're a strong candidate to get buy-in from those individuals. And finally, these late stage interviews sometimes might involve you making a more formal presentation and really closing the deal, particularly in positions where you are interviewing with a search committee. They may ask you in advance of the interview to prepare something sort of formalized, a presentation to make, and this is really your opportunity, again, to reinforce strengths, minimize weaknesses, and really close the deal for the position. Be prepared to talk with them, again, about all of the things that you've already touched on about how you are the best candidate for the position. And finally, this is your opportunity to really tell them that you want the job. I've heard from employer partners previously that even in these late stage interviews, sometimes they still are not 100% certain that a candidate is 100% certain about an opportunity. So this is your opportunity to make sure that you do describe that to them. Following up. This is something that is important at pretty much any and all phase of a job search process. When you're thinking about the final rounds of interviewing, keep in mind that each person is important. You may have met with several different individuals in the organization, and if you meet with someone new and you did not meet them before, it's always a good idea to loop around, you know, to thank the people that you're meeting each time, and also to loop back around. Speak with if there was an original recruiter or a representative from the Human Resources Department that sort of brought you in at the beginning, make sure that you're looping back around with those kinds of people to keep them informed on how the process is going for you. If you have any questions that have arisen since the last time you interviewed, it's always important to sort of keep everyone within the same sphere in terms of the job search. If there was someone who had referred you originally for the position, whether they're internal to the organization or external, it's also a good idea to keep that person informed and really make sure that you're keeping them as part of the loop throughout the process as well. And certainly if you receive an offer, you want to make sure that you're following up and thanking all of those individuals that you've met with or who had helped you along the way. Finally, following up is important in terms of relationship building. Even if an opportunity does not work out, it's important to maintain these connections and be grateful to the people that you've met and spoken to during the process. You never know how things can sort of change and turn around either immediate or in the distant future. So make sure that you're following up and really solidifying relationships in order to be able to maybe help others in the future or continue to have help yourself. As I had said earlier, this is a very bare bones approach to some of these issues, which are quite complicated. And I'm, hopeful and pretty certain that our panelists will be able to talk a little bit more in detail on some of these things, but I'm just giving a general overview. I wanted to mention when you do receive a job offer, hooray! Here are some things that are important to consider. I think the obvious one of those that many people think about is sort of the primary thing to consider when evaluating a job offer is pay. And obviously that's certainly important. But I want you to also keep in mind that there are other aspects of a job offer that you want to find out about to really make sure that the decision you're making is based on a lot of different things. After all, work is still work, so you want to make sure that when you're considering things that you don't just look at pay as a deciding factor. Other things to consider, most certainly benefits and perks. Some of these things may not be immediately clear, but particularly if it's a larger organization, you can find out a lot simply by looking on their website and using resources like LinkedIn and Glassdoor to find out about benefits and perks that are offered. And when I say benefits and perks, I'm not only talking about the traditional insurance plans, 401k, those kinds of things. I'm also talking about, do they have wellness programs? Do they offer casual Fridays? Do they have affiliations with other organizations and corporate discounts? Do they offer Bagel Mondays? Different things like that can really make a difference when you're weighing a job offer. Another thing that's important to look at is the hours, and does the position require any traveling? And this can be, travel at a distance or travel within the metro area. Those types of things are important as well, whether that's something you are eager to do or not so eager to do. It's important to know up front when the offer has been made if you do have, a responsibility for travel, or if it's a position where it's very strictly 8:30 to 5:30 each day with 1 hour lunch, or if it's a little bit more of a 24-hour-a-day opportunity. However, some employees may not report to work until 10 o'clock. Those are the types of things to find out and consider when you're thinking about an offer. The other things to think about, lifestyle and culture. And when I say lifestyle, does it provide you with an opportunity to continue with a lifestyle that you're used to? If you've been working in an organization and it's casual attire and you don't really have a lot of business casual or business professional attire, that can make a difference in terms of how comfortable you are when you're in the workplace. The culture is also very important. The culture of the organization and its people. I spoke with someone recently who left a job in New York City and had been working in very conservative corporate cultures in New York City for a number of years, and they took a job in the suburbs, and they're finding that the culture is very, very different, and it's not quite as fast-paced, and there seems to be a lot more focus on wellness and work-life balance in this particular organization. So those are the types of things to consider in addition to compensation. Another thing to think about, is this position a lateral move, or does it provide upward mobility right away? And sort of what I mean by this is, perhaps it's a similar position in a different company, which might be considered a lateral move in some ways, but if you're moving from a smaller organization into a larger organization, there could be opportunities to move up more quickly. It could be better compensation, or maybe not. The other thing to think about is upward mobility. If you are moving into a position that is a promotion, that's at a higher level job, and it has more responsibility, are you also being compensated accordingly, and are you prepared for additional responsibilities, maybe longer hours or the prospect of managing others? It's certainly important to keep in mind what a job will provide for you in terms of learning and responsibility level and management and leadership opportunities versus just the pay. Another thing that I think many people find helpful when they're evaluating a job offer is to simply make a list. Make a list of the pros and cons of the position that you're considering. Also make a list of the pros and cons of your current position, and compare these two lists and sort of see what makes the most, what emerges as the most important factors. And those are some of the important things to keep in mind. And lastly, I mentioned outside factors. Think about what's happening with, with the economy. What's happening, particularly something very timely now, if you're looking at a position related to government or within certain nonprofit areas, how will those be impacted by the results of local or national elections? It's also important to think about is your current role, and why are you leaving a current position, and are there certain outside factors that may be present now that would not be present in the future, and just sort of considering all of those types of things, and not just looking at the pay for a new position, and keeping in mind that things could change easily related to outside and external factors as well. Before I move into my final organized remarks on resignation, I just wanted to remind everyone that you can send in questions at any time related to the remarks that I've made recently. If not, the panelists will be speaking shortly, so you should be able to send a number of questions in to them after they've spoken. So finally, just some basic tips on the resignation process. And this is something I don't think a lot of people give much thought to in advance. My recommendation on, once you've decided that you are going to accept a job offer, and you've done so, and you've seen it in writing and everything looks good, and you've signed on the dotted line, at that point it is appropriate and recommended that you speak with your direct supervisor. This should be a conversation that's held in private, if at all possible in person, and I would say to set aside enough time so that the conversation will be taken seriously by that person, and they can see that you are taking it seriously as well. I recommend that you prepare a couple of talking points ahead of time, but keeping in mind that you should be humble. Even if you're super excited about your new offer, you have to keep in mind that this is going to make things probably difficult, at least in the interim, for your immediate supervisor, so keep that in mind. Anticipate the types of questions that they may ask you about your offer, and decide what you're comfortable sharing or keeping to yourself. Also, consider if they would make a counter offer, and if this is something you would consider, what the terms of that counter offer would need to be in order for you to accept it or not accept it. Customarily, 2 weeks notice at a minimum is generally recommended. Circumstances may dictate otherwise, but Generally, a 2-week notice at minimum is sort of the professional and appropriate way to go about it. I think if there, are other factors, those can certainly be brought up in the offer and negotiation process. Keep in mind that throughout the entire resignation process, you want to remain positive and professional. Keeping in mind that, again, building relationships and preserving relationships throughout your career is extremely important. You never know when you may cross paths with each other again. You could be going to a competitor or a client or a vendor. You want to make sure that you're remaining positive and professional throughout the process. And finally, written notice. It is important to still put together a written notice just to indicate your final date of termination and just to sort of wrap things up professionally and in writing. If this is something you're interested in doing, we do have some examples of resignation notices that we could share with you. But in general, these are just sort of some of the basic tips that I would provide to someone if they are going through that process of resigning for a position. Okay. All right, so now that I've finished speaking about these programs, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to the first of our 2 panelists today. I'm happy to be able to invite and have Lynn Alba joining us today. She is a current student here at the CUNY School of Professional Studies. She is a candidate for her BS degree in business. She's also a recipient of the ACE scholarship here at SPS. Hooray, Lynn! She is currently a talent acquisition manager at the Children's Place. So Lynn, I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to you. If you can just kind of give us a quick bio and maybe talk a little bit about your perspectives as an employer when putting together offers and negotiating and those kinds of things.
Great. Well, thank you, Shannon. I'm happy to be here. So yes, as Shannon mentioned, I'm a student. I've actually been a student here for about 6 years, so never completed my degree. I had an associate's and found SPS when I was looking to complete my degree. Being somebody that looks at resumes every single day and knows that education is an important part of moving forward in your career, I felt that it was important. So I'm about 4 classes out. That also includes my capstone, so I should be graduating this summer with a little bit of an aggressive push, but I'm almost there. So I promise you the end is near for everyone. You will get there. Just work hard and it all happens. As for my role, I have worked with Children's Place for about 2 years. I've been in recruiting and talent acquisition for 19, so I started this career at a very young age and just have continued to progress forward in my career, and been really fortunate to work for some great companies, Starbucks, The Gap, and now the Children's Place, so all in the retail segment. So it's super exciting. I think my perspective today is really from an employer standpoint. So I negotiate offers with candidates every day. I work with them on their expectations, and then I work with the hiring managers to make decisions for them. So I would say if you are in the late stages of your interviews, at that point your recruiter should have pre-closed you, should have already had some pretty in-depth conversations about your compensation package. And so what I would say to any candidate is you should be very clear and honest about what that package looks like. So think about all of the things that go into making up your salary. So what is your base salary? Do you get any bonuses? Do you have a certain premium for certain types of benefits? Do you have a car allowance? Do you, and also go into the other fundamental things, so your benefits package, how many weeks vacation do you have, how many paid holidays do you have, do you have things like summer Fridays where you get off early? All of those things should be told to the recruiter that you're working with, whether it's at a company or an agency. You should let them know from the jump what you do and what you have today, and that the offer that you're looking to receive should be at that or better, because that will give you a very clear story walking into it, and the recruiter on the other end of the phone can either say that's not going to match what we have, or they can say yes, we can work with that. That is my biggest feedback to any candidate. I hear a lot, I don't want to talk about salary, why don't you tell me what your salary range is. I will tell you 9 out of 10 candidates say to me, why don't you tell me what your range is? And my response to them is, well, I can't give you a range until you tell me where you're currently at. So let's have that honest conversation. So walk into it being honest about what you're at today and what your expectations are. It's okay to be looking for an increase in salary, but also be realistic that companies have a budget and they have an expectation of what they want to pay as well. And then wrapping up, when you get to the offer stage, know that in good faith, the companies have come to you with their best offer. In my experience, 19 years, I don't lowball. I don't walk in there. I work really hard as a recruiter to make sure that that number is the number you're going to feel good about. So if you are going to counteroffer and say, no, I want more money, have your facts. No, I would like more money because X, or no, I don't feel that that offer meets my expectations because of X. Typically, when a recruiter has to go back to a hiring manager and tell them that a candidate wants more money, there is a little bit of a back and forth and a push and pull, and it doesn't always work in your favor. So make sure that you know kind of the risks before you go into it. But all offers should be considered from a total reward standpoint, not just the money, but benefits, vacation time, are there perks? Like today here at TCP, we had our sample sale, and everything was $1. So I got to get a lot of great product for my kids, and I feel like that's a perk. So there are things that companies offer that you don't even realize before you ask those questions. So I don't know if that's enough, Shannon. I feel like that answers a lot of kind of what we talked about, but I'm here to answer questions later.
I think that's perfect, Lynn. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And it's nice to hear from you being close to completion of your degree. I like that you gave the participants today a little bit of encouragement for that, so thank you. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to our second panelist for today's webinar, Jamie Wells. Jamie Wells is also an SPSer, as I would say. She graduated from the School of Professional Studies with her BS degree in business in 2012. And she currently works in the staffing space. She is an associate for the Office Support and Human Resources Division at the ExecuSearch Group. So Jamie, I'll let you kind of take over the floor now. If you can just give us a little bit of a background on yourself and your experience, and then talk a little bit about how things are in your role as a recruiter within a staffing firm, and how you can, really work well with the candidates.
Sure, thanks, Shannon. So yes, like Lynn and Shannon mentioned, was at SPS again while working, as most of us are, trying to finish my degree that I had started previously in my life. And at that point, and for 10 years, I spent within mostly financial services on the office support side, so office manager, executive assistant, and that's still where I specialize here. I actually used ExecuSearch as my recruiter back then, so about 10 years ago, and they were so great, so when I was trying to make a transition, I popped right over into the same team that helped me. So recruiters can be different. They're like cars, they're like houses. Everyone serves the same purpose, but they all work very differently. On my side, I really work like a matchmaker. I am trying to meet candidates, and I have client specs and job descriptions from people we've worked with a lot and with new clients. So I really try to understand what my client is looking for and what my candidate is looking for in totality. As Lynn mentioned, work-life balance, making the most money possible, upward growth and trajectory. So I actually work on 100% commission, so it's in my best interest to get you every extra dollar I can. And also, if it doesn't work out, we do not collect a fee. So it's really about us trying to make sure everyone's happy in the position. Why external recruiters and staffing agencies are very helpful is we're really your advocate. We are trying to provide you as much insight in the business. I can't lie to you because you will know within 5, 10, 15 days of being there that I sold you a bad product. And we try to provide insight into office environment, even coaching through the interview process. What's the interviewer's personality? What questions do they tend to ask? And what answers they like and what answers they don't like. In addition, we'll have extra insight, especially for some of our long-term clients. Executive Search has now been around 30 years. So we've worked with a lot of these people. I can tell you people have placed there, people that have worked there, people who have already interviewed and maybe said X and that's not what the client, the recruiter at the agency wanted to hear. So I can help coach you through that. Also, I can really help you long-term and short-term goals. There are a lot of clients that are very honest with us. This is an executive assistant for life. There is no growth. There is no step. I met with a CEO yesterday that said, I don't know what this role looks like, but I want the person to grow with us and to grow with me. So I can help you really understand what this can do long-term for you, because there are people that want to be receptionists for the rest of their life, and if that can fit in with my client's needs, it really helps everyone. The best thing that really helps, I think, on the recruiter candidate side is we can get anonymous information for you. If somebody mentions something questionable within an interview process, you can come back to the recruiter and we can ask on an anonymous level, what did you mean by your offices are moving? What did you mean that there could be long hours or you need 24-hour availability? We can really try to get some more information and see if it is a good fit. As Shannon mentioned, the person across the table wants to hire you and fill this job as much as you want to get the job. So it really is a dual interview in trying to make sure you're making the right decision, because as soon as somebody starts moving jobs every 6 months, a year, and doesn't create tenure, it's hard for your resume. It makes your resume a little bit weaker. At the same point, we can give you coaching on resume tips. So the third thing that I think is really important is we can help, as Lynn mentioned, understand what the full package is. Getting a free gym membership, getting free commuting, getting your cell phone paid. These things all add up. Free lunches. What's that? A salad's $15 in Manhattan now. So $15 a day can be really important. And really having you look at that pro-con list with another person that really can guide you through the thought process, as this is something we do every single day. And really going through the interview process. Interviewing is a full-time job. We are really there to be the person doing the legwork, doing the logistics between phone screens, who are you talking to, when are you going in, what time should you be there, what should you wear, sending out the thank yous for you. There's no need for thank you emails, really, and if so, at the final round, we can double check that there are no spelling or grammar errors. So that's really what the staffing agency does for you. Unfortunately, Lynn has a little bit of an easier job in regards to making any transitions. So it's very hard for me to bring in a ballerina and put them into an astronaut's position, no matter, they could be the best astronaut that's ever came to Earth. But it's hard for me to sell on a client side that's given us a spec and is going to pay us. It's hard for me to do that transition. So that's a little bit of a fallback. It's harder to do the transition, but again, we can talk about long-term plans and how to get you into your dream job, whether that's 2, 5, 10 years down the road.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. It was so nice to hear the perspective that you add in sitting in the staffing agency role, because I think while there are certainly similarities between the work that you do and the work that Lynn does, there are certainly some differences as well. So I've already got a couple of questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and start moderating through those. Bear with me throughout this process because I've got a bunch of stuff in front of me that So I'm going to sort of weed through the questions and try to maintain some sort of routine and, keep sort of on the subject as we go forward. Okay, so here I've gotten a couple of questions. All right, so this is, I think, a pretty simple question, and I'll go ahead, Jamie, since you were just recently speaking. Is there a fee to use ExecuSearch and other agencies for the candidate?
Typically not, and I would ask if anyone asks for a piece of your first paycheck to run. There are all kinds of free agencies that you should use. So really it's on the onus of the employer. They typically have a fee agreement in place. Those agreements will vary from agency to agency, but all of our fees are paid by our clients. However, I work on the temporary, permanent side of the business, so my jobs are Monday through Friday and on a long-term process. When you are using a temp division, which is also something we provide here, what would happen is you'd have an hourly rate that you are paid, and that hourly rate may be, let's say, $17 an hour. We might bill $20 an hour to the client, so our fee would be $3 and $17 an hour would go into your pocket.
Thank you, Jamie. If I remember correctly, there are primarily two types of staffing firms. One would be contingency and one would be retained. Is that correct?
That's correct. So I'm on the contingency basis, so we only get paid if we place a person in a role and they are successful for 90 days or more. So on the retained search, most of the time this is higher level roles or very complex roles. So if I'm Target and I want to have a new CEO and I really like the CEO at Walmart, I would pay a fee to a retained firm to get, a very specific skill set or a person.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. And that's, contingency and retained are sort of how the agencies are referred to in terms of how they're paid by the employers. So generally,
I would just jump in and say that I started my career on the agency side. As a candidate, many times you don't even feel that, because it's the agency's job to kind of buffer that for you. So there were many times that I would take a lesser fee if I needed to get a candidate more money. So a lot of that stuff you don't feel as a candidate, especially as a temp. Typically, the markup and things like that come into play. It's really what's in the best interest of the candidate at that point. So, and from a retained perspective, there are, as a recruiter myself, I've had agencies that have reached out to me to help me find a job when I was in the market, and there was never a cost. So the good recruiters don't need to charge their candidates. They're getting their good money from their companies.
Yeah,
I agree.
I think, and if there's anybody who, during your job search process, if you are interested in working with, staffing firms and you're just, not sure about some of these things, please reach out to myself and Career Services, or if you're from a different CUNY campus, your career center on your campus. They can certainly advise you through these processes, but I think generally if there's a fee for you as a candidate, it's probably not, not a legitimate recruiter to work with, and you can certainly find others that are fantastic that would not charge you any fees.
Exactly.
Thank you both. Thank you both. Okay, I'm going to move into a couple of questions that are specific around salary. Okay, Lynn, let me have you start with this one. What if, because you did touch a little bit on this, what if you are currently interning and you don't have a current salary to report in terms of sharing the information with the prospective employer? How would you approach that as a candidate?
That's a great question, and I get it a lot because I do a lot of our entry-level roles here, and I work with our campus recruiter. We actually pay for our internships here, and most of the paid internships that are out there are somewhere in the neighborhood of $14 to $17 is about what we see in the marketplace. What I would do is I would do do some research and go on some websites, salary.com. There are several different versions out there. I'm sure Career Services can help you as well, and kind of get a grasp on what that compensation is. Now, if you're returning to work or if you're changing careers, you can look at what your past compensation was and say, I was an admin assistant and I was making $47,000 a year, and now I want to be an HR manager because I received my degree, and the average salary for that is $65,000 a year. The recruiter is going to ask those questions and really work with you on trying to understand that. Most jobs have a minimum. This is a little bit inside scoop for you. There's a minimum, a mid, and a max. There's a minimum that we want to pay for that. And due to some FLSA laws and some things and laws within New York State and things of that nature, there are minimum salaries that companies have set up, and then there's a maximum that they have to pay, because from a budgetary standpoint, they can't pay more than this for the sheer fact that it would offset the salary for the department. So know that when they're walking into it, they have that in their mind, and you should have yours in your mind as well.
And I'll speak, if you don't mind, for a moment on our end. Is I get a lot of what Lynn said. Tell me what their range is, and that's just not fair. If I'm making $20,000 an hour and this budget's up to $200,000, there's no way I can get somebody $200,000 on the agency side. Especially right now, we have a very competitive marketplace, and again, even an ambiguous number like fair market value, it's really not. That's an average. That's somebody on the high end. That's somebody on the low end. So really going in, especially as an entry level, and looking at the full package. Where will this bring me long term? And on the agency side, I'm lucky I can use the word flexible, because again, as a person that works at 100% commission, I want to get you every single dollar. And I work similar to what Lynn just mentioned. I always say, okay, what doesn't make sense? For $1 an hour, I could not fathom taking this job. What would you like to hear, and what would you love to hear? And my job is, even if they come in at your like number and say, yes, I would accept the job at 50, my job is to continue to say, is there any bonus? Is there any overtime? Can I get a sign-on bonus? And try to get you another 1,000, 2,000, whatever we can do.
Great points, both of you. I think that when I was talking about things to consider when you're evaluating job offers, I don't think that I brought up bonuses and commissions and things like that. And that also makes a big difference, particularly when you're considering leaving an opportunity and there's a bonus in your future. Sometimes those kinds of things can give you some bargaining perspective as well. So yeah, definitely. Thank you both. Those are great points. Another question that's sort of related to salary, bear with me a second, I just had it in front of me. Okay. Actually, I think that this was addressed. If you're making a career transition, how do you approach that with the salary? And I think the key here is to really, do some research ahead of time. And I think that having an idea of what sort of the averages are in your geographical area for someone with your education and experience, that's sort of a good starting point when you're trying to give some numbers. Here's a question somewhat related. Jamie, I'll let you take this one first, and then if Lynn has anything to add. Is it appropriate to ask about compensation packages during the first interview? And Jamie, if you could just sort of kind of answer that, and then also let us know when you do think it is appropriate, and how should a candidate broach the subject of compensation in the interview process?
Sure. I'm using a staffing agency is very different from what Lynn's answer is going to be on this. So I tell my people, go in, nail the interview, get the job, we'll worry about numbers later. Obviously, the very first meeting before I send you on a single interview, you and I, the candidate and the recruiter, will talk about numbers. And we'll talk about what's reasonable. If you're trying to work less hours, you can't also ask for an increase. If you got a raise in December and you're getting a new job in January, you can't really ask for a large increase. Can't get really a raise on a raise unless you have a substantial job function that's rare. Using executive assistants, which is really the biggest section of our business on my end, that is hard because they do a lot of the same jobs. But if I work for, again, Target, the CEO of Target, and I'm going to the CEO of Walmart, I might have a little bit of a different skill set. So that being said, we are always coaching the person. I'm flexible and looking for a competitive offer. But we'll make sure that when you walk out of the interview, every single interview, whether there's 4 or 5, I would talk to my candidate about numbers, and that will change. I have a woman that has come in and said, I really need to make at least $70,000, and after she met a company, understood the perks, understood the environment, understood the growth potential, she was down to $55,000. She was willing to go down $15,000 just to make sure that she got the opportunity. Again, I don't want her to do that, and I got her more money than that, but we'll talk about it every step of the process, because there are some jobs you might walk in and say, I could do the job, I don't really like the job, so I'm going to need more money. So on my aspect, you don't talk to the internal recruiter about it. That's something that we talk about on Sidebar.
Thank you, Jamie. And Lynn, from your end, can you talk a little bit about the discussion about it and when to bring it up and how?
It should be asked. I mean, typically your first interview, if you're interviewing with a fairly mid to large size company, there's going to be a recruiter or an HR professional that's going to have that first conversation with you, and they should be asking you that question. I'm not a fan of anyone, whether you are going on an interview from an agency or anyone else, of asking that question directly to hiring managers or anyone else, because at the end of the day it should have been discussed at the front end. If it's not asked to you on your first interaction with an HR person or such, there is a way to ask it and say, well, can we discuss if this is within the range of my expectations, versus saying, can you tell me the salary? Because I think in most cases, they should be asking you at the front end. Now, you may have filled out an application on ATS or an applicant tracking system, and you might have put your salary there, and maybe they thought they had the question answered there. But quite frankly, if you're meeting with a mid to large size company, you're probably going to be asked the question anyway. But my advice to you is not to continue to ask that question through steps in the interview process to like hiring managers. So say you were going to interview with multiple people, those people don't ultimately make that decision. The HR department does in partnership with them. So you don't want to look like that's the most important thing when you're walking in.
Thank you, Lynn. I think that's both of you have made really great points. It's something that when we talk with our students and graduates, we try to keep in mind that they need to be prepared to have those conversations, from the beginning point of the job search process, but not be the one to bring it up. That way, you won't totally be caught off guard, but it also sometimes can come across that your only concern is the pay, and really when you're job searching, you need to be thinking about all sorts of other things in terms of the work itself. So thank you both for your perspectives. We'll take a sort of a different turn now, and we'll talk a little bit about, I've gotten a couple of sort of different questions all over the place, so I'll just go ahead and dive into some of these. I got 2 questions about following up. I have a question here. I sent a follow-up thank you note email 2 weeks after my interview, but I haven't heard anything back. The job posting is going to close next week. Should I follow up again? What is appropriate? How much follow-up is too much? Lynn, could you start this one, and then maybe Jamie, if you have anything to add?
Yeah, no problem. I think if it's a job posting that's got a date that's closing, my assumption is it's probably either a city or a state job or something like that, because they actually have start and end dates. When we're looking at my world or lots of corporate jobs, there's usually not a start and end date. There's a goal where they want to fill it by, but for them it's really about finding the best possible person. If you sent the follow-up email after your interview and did not receive a response or did not receive a communication, I am under the full assumption that recruiters should be responding to you and advising you. If you're working through an agency, your contact is the agency. Sorry to steal your thunder on that one, Jamie, but you should you should be following up with Jamie. And if you're working with a company, it depends on who you sent the email to. Now, if you sent a follow-up email to the recruiter and didn't hear anything, it's perfectly appropriate to send a follow-up to the recruiter, but I would not send multiple follow-ups to a hiring manager, because that hiring manager is expecting the recruiter to do the follow-up for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Jamie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, not really. She stole my thunder. No,
Sorry.
No, it's fine. So yeah, on an agency side, when your recruiter really does all the legwork for you. On a candidate side, personally, again, I wouldn't probably ask another executive assistant or office manager. If I had a hiring manager's contact information, I think it's also perfectly acceptable to follow up throughout the career and say, we spoke on such and such a date regarding such and such a position you had open. I recently noticed this new position. Would this be a better skill set for me? And that can really put you over the top sometimes, being the person that continues to follow up and be persistent. And I've had clients explain that to me as, we've actually found a person, we've been in communication with this person for a year or 2 years, and it can just show your dedication and your admiring the brand as a whole.
Great, thank you. And sort of a related question based on the follow-up and sort of the post-interview phase. Is it okay to request an interviewer's connection on LinkedIn? And I would sort of add to this, I guess, when is it okay to request that someone who interviewed you to connect with on LinkedIn? Jamie, do you want to start that one, and then Lynn?
Sure. I actually think that we're going to probably have two very different answers. I'm a huge proponent of networking, period. When I meet people and I get their cards, I add them to LinkedIn. You just never know. So I would say I would always accept, and I don't know that there's a timing etiquette at all. So I'm interested to hear what Lynn wants to say to this.
Okay, let's hear it.
I sort of agree, but there's also that I don't know how to put this in an appropriate way. There's also just when you look at somebody's profile on LinkedIn, unless the person has put on their privacy where you can't see their name, you can actually see when people stop by and visit you, is what I call it. So there are functions to be able to turn those things on and off, just to give you some insight if you did not know that. So if you go into your settings tab, you can change that. So if I'm a candidate and I'm interviewing with Sally Jones tomorrow, I may go look at Sally Jones's profile, and I'm going to tell my candidates to do that. So even from an inside recruiter perspective, you're going to be interviewing with these three people. Go check out their LinkedIn profiles. Go see what their history is like. I wouldn't necessarily recommend making the connection if it's a corporate company until after you've met them. It's kind of a nice way to kind of wrap it up in a big bow, because you can do it as kind of part of a thank you. But it's, either way, I think it's appropriate. I mean, LinkedIn is a networking tool, so you can connect with people, and you shouldn't feel bad either way if you do it before and or after. Typically, I'm connected to people that come in because they found me online, and I'm very active, and I have a huge network. So I don't think that there's a yes or no answer here. I would just remember that they're going to know you stopped by anyway. So if you didn't connect with them, is there a reason? So take that into consideration.
I think both of your answers to that sound good. I might also add that, particularly with an interview process that, might be with, a smaller organization, because many different industries and sectors, it's always a small world. So if you just be careful if you are conducting a confidential job search that you don't have a lot of things open on your profile, so that if you make a new connection with 3 recruiters at Target, as Jamie had mentioned a couple of times, if you work at Walmart and your manager sees that you've recently connected with recruiters at Target, be careful. So just sort of keep those kinds of things in mind, that LinkedIn, while it is a very, very valuable tool, you want to be mindful of those kinds of things and use the right strategies when you are, sort of using those kinds of networking tools.
And I'll also like to add to that is be careful with all of your social media in the same way. I had a security company last week pass on a candidate because she was a nighttime radio host, and that's fine. But as a security person and having access to government contracts, things like that, they didn't want anyone too far into the public eye. And same with drinking alcohol and dressing inappropriately. We get a lot of feedback regarding that, and truthfully, I should do a better job. I don't even look at that. I use LinkedIn almost exclusively, and in this day and age, you can really contact and get a hold of a lot of different pictures and information on people.
Great. Thank you.
Private.
I'm sorry, Lynn, you had something to add?
I said be private on any other social media other than LinkedIn, if at all possible.
Yeah, I think that's smart. It's something that I don't think about as much because many of the students and alumni within CUNY SPS, are more mature, more professional people with a little bit more experience in the workplace, but it's not something that I think about a lot, but I think you both make a really good point with that. So thank you. All right, so I'm going to move into a couple of different questions. We sort of got a bunch of different types of things coming through. Okay, so this one is kind of interesting, and I'm going to ask Lynn to cover it. It's somewhat related to the remarks that I was making regarding resignation. How do you manage a resignation conversation if you have applied for and been accepted for a position within the same company?
It's a great question, but I will say that most departments would be probably communicating with each other about that change. So in most companies, there's a policy in which if you're interested in applying for a job in another department or another area or a transfer, you need to have your manager sign off on it. So my assumption would be if you were to go interview for a job in another part of the company, that hiring manager is going to pick up the phone and call your boss and go, hey, are you okay with this? So I think it's less of a resignation and more of a notification, if that's fair. It happens here all the time. And usually they're sidebar water cooler conversation, but at the same time, there's usually some notice and you kind of know it's going down that path. I wouldn't be as nervous about that because usually it's in your best interest and the company's aware that you're doing it.
Yeah, I agree completely. The only other thing that I might add to that is, depending on the organization and how large it is, if it's sometimes people can be internally competitive. And I think that in terms of, making sure that you preserve the relationship that you have with your previous supervisor as well as your future supervisor, I would always say to err on the side of open communication rather than trying to keep things secret, just to make sure that no one feels like you're slighting them one way or the other. Thank you, Lynn. Jamie, did you have anything to add on that?
No, that's
okay.
She covered it perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Well, my next question is for you, Jamie. It's geared for someone working in staffing. How do recruiters help people that are interested in making a career transition if they don't have experience in the new industry? And secondly, how would you select how do you select a specific staffing agency to work with for your job search?
So in regards to transition, it's honestly very difficult unless you have some sort of skill set. So a lot of my executive assistants want to get into HR because they are very closely aligned. It's very difficult unless you've done it. It's easier to do a transition on your own. However, what we can do, and what I explain to people, is I can help you find firms that like to do internal promotion. And a lot of our mid to larger firms, they will post a job internally, as Lynn mentioned, prior to opening it up to the public, and can really help you grow. There are other firms that are saying, no, there is no growth here. So unfortunately, that's not a lovely answer for you, but it's truthful. In regards to finding which agency to use, I, again, feel very differently. Our firm is heavily accounting, and I work very closely in proximity and working relationship with our accounting team, and they will tell their candidates all the time, don't use any other firms, only use us. And I actually feel that's hindering a lot of, if on my end, it would hinder my candidates more than it would help them. I'm not going to have every job. I'm not going to have every candidate. So it makes sense to use a few. I probably wouldn't use everyone because you could get very busy, and you don't want to be throwing too many eggs at the wall, especially when you have a job to keep. Interviewing is a lot of time and a lot of energy. But it's interviewing the agency as well. And you have to ask me what my process is, what my thoughts are. I like to be very forthright. I like to be very honest. And I've worked with other agencies that I walked out of an interview and I took time off from my current position to say that I wasn't, I'm not qualified for this job. I'm not interested in this job. And this is everything I told them I didn't want in my next position. And that's not fair to anyone involved, whether you're the candidate or the person looking to fill the job on the other side of the table. So I think it's going to be trial and error, asking your friends, doing research. I'm not a big proponent, again, about Glassdoor, because when's the last time you wrote something nice randomly about your boss online? But doing your research, doing your due diligence, and trying them out. It's like any other brand.
I think you make a good point. I worked for a short time in the staffing agency world as well, and I did a lot of temp placements, and something I think to keep in mind is that some agencies focus on very specific industries, so that can be something to look at as well. If you're working in fashion, for example, there are specific agencies that only work within the fashion space, so that can narrow things down a little bit. And I also think that, as Jamie said, it's a little bit trial and error, and as she had mentioned before, a lot of it is the recruiter getting to really know you and how you would best match with their client needs. So a lot of it is building rapport and creating a relationship with a particular recruiter who seems to really understand who you are, what your strengths are, what your interests are, and those kinds of things. If a method that some of you are trying to use, I would recommend that you speak with your career services office, because we can give you advice and help you to identify which types of staffing firms might be best for you to work with. But in general, I do think it can be a very useful way to conduct a job search. So thank you, Jamie. Lynn,
I'll be the first to admit that a lot of recruiters are terrible. So always know that there's that end, and you need to figure out who's going to call you back, who's going to tell you the truth. So just having that honest conversation is going to be the first step in the right direction.
Sure. Lynn, do you have anything to add to that?
No, the one thing I would say is on the staffing side, probably the best way that you can do a career transition is temping, because temp assignments give you the opportunity to test things out and companies to test you out, and in many places they're not looking for the and don't take this the wrong way, the perfect fit, but they are a little bit more open. So from maybe an admin perspective, you might become an admin in HR, and now you've extended your background to do a little bit more human resources or things like that. So I am a huge component of it. I mean, I was, again, in the staffing industry for a very long time, and I ran branches of staffing for temp and perm, and I've done it all. And there are many people that have come in and said, you know, I'm looking to make a transition, and so send them in out on temp assignments, gives them exposure. It might allow them to learn new computer skills that they never used with before, and such. So I would also consider that if you are looking to make a transition.
Great ideas. I'm realizing that we could probably sit here and answer these questions all day, but it's actually a couple of minutes past 1:30. So I want to go ahead and just wrap everything up. As you can see on your screen, I will be sending out an online survey. So I hope that our attendees will take just like 1 or 2 minutes to fill that out and let us know what you thought of our webinar. I wanted to thank over and over Jamie Wells and Lynn Alba for joining us today. I thought that your remarks were interesting and candid and helpful, so I hope that you enjoyed presenting on our webinar as much as I'm sure our attendees enjoyed you presenting on our webinar. If anyone would like to follow up with our panelists, you can contact me here in Career Services or find them on LinkedIn. Put your social networking, your social and professional networking skills to good use and do so. If I did not answer your question on today's webinar, I would recommend that you reach out to me or to your respective career center if you're from another CUNY campus. Thank you once again, Jamie and Lynn, and I hope everyone else enjoys the rest of your day.